All right. So I first just want to thank everyone for being here. And if at any point you can't hear me or you can't see me, just let me know. This is my first time doing a webinar presentation. I'm very used to having an entire audience right here that I can see. Um, so I hope you'll bear with me if there's any technical difficulties. Can everybody see the presentation? It says coping with COVID-19. Give me a chat if anybody can see it. Great. Thanks, Kelly. So, and this is also practicing using our chat. So, I am hoping to have participation from you all today. I don't want to just hear myself talk the entire time. And so, feel free to chime in with questions. And if the question feels like it's really timely, I might stop kind of right then and there and answer it. And if it feels like something I'm going to cover, I will try my best to come back to it. And if by the end you've asked a question that never got attention, we will have time then as well. So, welcome. So, my name is Sara Boilen. I am a clinical psychologist. I'm the owner and chief psychologist at Sweetgrass Psychological Services here in Whitefish. And Sweetgrass is a group practice sort of specializing in improving the mental wellness of individuals and communities. And so today's webinar is focused on both of those, improving your mental wellness and also of the greater community, we hope. So, sorry, I'm just getting situated myself. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the other things that Sweetgrass is offering, but for the most part, we are just going to dive right in. So, here is our overview for the day. And I realize I have an obstacle at my feet that I'm going to need to move. So, give me 1 second. Anybody else having this whole like home office, like, oh, wow, my home is not set up for this. So I'm in our guest bedrooms where I've been working for the last 2 weeks, seeing therapy clients and doing consulting. And I have a lovely view of our outside, but it is really different from my office. So we're going to talk a lot about how abnormal things feel today and what we're going to do about that. So here's our overview. We're going to kind of focus on mental wellness as a definition. We're going to talk a lot about anxiety, stress, and worry, because those are three of the strongest experiences that I've been hearing about. We're going to talk a little bit about your body on stress, so what's going on in your body, how it's affected by this experience. We're going to dive into something called the window of tolerance, which I will explain and you will understand by the end of this. And then we're going to spend a lot of time talking about how we take care of ourselves, how we cope, and how we stay well through this tough time. So that is our overview. All right, so I first just want to kind of talk about mental health. So I think a lot of people tend to think, we think about physical health, it's sort of ubiquitous. We don't really even think of it as a thing. So we think about heart rate, blood pressure, your digestion, etc. So mental health is similar in that it is also ubiquitous. It's just not something that we talk about quite as much. So, mental health has kind of a physiological component, a psychological component, a mental component. And I think for many of us, I don't know if anybody in this room, but for many of us, we tend to think of mental health as mental health illness. So we think about mental health as you have mental health if you have something wrong. But it turns out, just like all of us have a heart rate, you might not have an elevated heart rate. We all have blood pressure, even if we don't have high or low blood pressure, right? We all have mental health. And so this isn't going to just be about pathology. This is kind of about normal mental health and also abnormal mental health. And we're going to focus on both of those today. So the World Health Organization defines mental wellness as a state in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and who's able to make a contribution to his or her community. So if we look at just this definition alone, I can say personally, I feel as if these days my mental wellness feels compromised. Does anybody else feel that way, right? Like, I don't feel like I'm making the same contribution I normally make. I definitely don't feel like I'm as productive. This office is not conducive for me. And the normal stresses of life, well, right now they're feeling pretty abnormal, right? So my coping has decreased. And mental wellness, just like our physical wellness, is something we're always working on. We're always adapting, we're always adjusting, we're always trying to kind of accommodate things. So, if any of you have had children in the time after you had, say, your first kid, there's a strong likelihood, just based on data, that you gained some weight. And one of the reasons for that is we have less exercise available to us. We have fewer opportunities to eat healthy because we're just kind of trying to manage, right? So, in that case, a normal stress of life caused a dip in physical wellness. And that happens, right? And it happens with mental wellness too. So, the first thing I want to do is just kind of normalize that a lot of us are struggling. But mental wellness is all about our ability to cope effectively. So when stress goes up, our coping needs to kind of go up to accommodate it, right? Okay. And since right now, so many of us are dealing with things we have never dealt with before. I have never worked from home in my life, for example. Um, we need to increase our coping. We need to change our coping, maybe even, right? So, any questions on the definition of mental wellness or what we'll be talking about today? Great. All right, let's continue. So we're going to dive right into worry. So raise your hand if you have been feeling worry lately. And what I'm going to really focus on right now is kind of discriminating between worry, stress, and anxiety. So I think anxiety is a little bit of a buzzword. If this were back in the 90s, we'd be talking more about stress, but it turns out they're not actually interchangeable. So I want to make sure that we understand what each one is so that we can not only name it appropriately, but we can deal with it appropriately. So worry happens in our mind, okay? And worry tends to be a thought or an idea or a recollection, even, or future kind of planning that we kind of get stuck on. And so I think of worry as kind of like being on a rotary or a roundabout, depending on where you're from. And the rotary, right, we can kind of like go in there and we're just going around and around and around. And wherever we were heading is no longer available to us. Suddenly, we are just going to spend our entire day or our entire hour in that roundabout, right? So, worry is not ideal. And it tends to kind of take the form of mental ruminations, right? But worry, just like every emotion that we have, actually has an adaptive quality to it. So the reason that we worry is that we are trying to figure out how to solve a particular problem, right? So worry actually is very healthy until it's not, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if we have a worry, say, like I was worried about the technology leading up to this webinar, for example, and there's something that I can do about it, the worry is almost like a little cue of, hey, Sarah, don't forget, you need to practice that technology. Hey, Sarah, don't forget, this could go wrong. And that worry ultimately kind of guided me to spend, 10 minutes this morning just making sure that this was going to go. When we're worried about something that we have no control over, we have no power or say in, that's when things become problematic, right? So now I'm worrying about something that I can't control. For example, what if I were worried that no one was going to show up today? I don't actually have any control over that, right? I can send out invitations, I can make reminders, but there was no way for me to guarantee that all 25 of you were going to actually come here today. right? But if I spend a lot of time worrying on that, it's going to cause me mental distress. It might even lead to mental anguish, right? So, if you feel comfortable sharing, that's great. If you don't want to, that's totally fine. But I'd love to just kind of hear from folks like, what are the worries that have been going through your mind recently? So, for example, my mom lives in New York City, as does my aunt, right? So, I've been really worried about their health and safety. I've been really worried about my business and trying to figure out, how is this going to affect my business? So, does anybody want to share what a worry is that they've been kind of reckoning with lately? Yeah, great. So, how to stay safe when I'm in the community for work, right? So, many of us have to go out into the community, whether that's just for grocery shopping or because we're essential workers, right? And so it's really possible that that worry is an adaptive worry, right? Because if you spend a little bit of time with that, you might actually come up with some strategies or solutions as to how to keep yourself safe. Now, if you have made your own mask that you're wearing, you're washing your hands regularly, you're taking all the precautions, you're staying 6 feet away, right? And that worry is still there, that's when it becomes problematic. And later we're going to talk about what to do when we have those problems. Does anybody else want to kind of share any worries? I would imagine that most of you who have worries are not alone in this. Yeah, so worry about your husband's mental state when he's at home with the children while you're working, worrying about your son who's a first responder and a daughter-in-law who works in the medical field, potentially being exposed, right? So these are worries, right, that we have actually very little control over. So when it comes to your husband's mental state, and trust me, I'm worried about my husband's also, uh, I can do things to support him. And yet there are certain things that I have no control over, right? I'm worried that I'm not productive as usual, right? So what we know is that, and I'm sure that as I'm reading these out loud and as you're seeing them on the chat, if you're looking, you're recognizing yourself in these, right? We all have these worries. They're totally natural and totally normal. And they're our brain's way of giving us some sense of like, I can do something, right? So we worry about our friends who are in healthcare. We worry about when this is going to end, right? And you can kind of see that some of these worries are things that we can control, but most of them relate to things we can't control. And when there's no off ramp on that rotary, because there's nothing we can do, we get stuck on that rotary. So my guess is, Steve, you've had this worry about when it's going to end. You haven't just had that worry once. You've had that worry 100 times or 1,000 times, maybe even a day, Those of you who are worrying about family members, it's not like you just have that worry and then you move on, right? We kind of wind up here. So this essential sort of emotional experience is designed to keep us calm and to generate solutions, and yet it so regularly backfires. Just kind of side note, I think throughout our talk today, you're going to notice that I'm sort of highlighting all the ways in which we're all struggling, and you're going to just kind of like feel yourself being deflated and lowered down and like, oh, yes, I know this, Sara, this is terrible. But I promise we are going to spend at least half our time together today kind of lifting ourselves back up and pulling ourselves to a different position. But it's important for us to acknowledge exactly where we are. So that's what we're doing first. Okay, so moving from worry, let's go to stress. So worry is this mental sort of rumination. Stress is a physiological response to a threat, right? Giving you all a chance just to kind of read this. I don't need to read them all out loud. But here's what happens, and this happens to us, and it happens to animals all over. It happens to pretty much everyone, even babies, right? So there's some sort of threat in the environment, some kind of trigger or stimulus. So if you're a deer out in nature and a stick breaks, that sound is the threat, right? We don't know, the deer doesn't know if that's a predator or not, right? But that's the trigger, right? Maybe there are other times like you're walking alone on a street at night and you hear somebody behind you, threat, right? It could be your spouse saying something to you that intimates that they might not be as attached to you as you are to them, threat, right? It could be COVID-19. And so we have these threats, right? And our body is programmed to respond to the threat by preparing you for fight or flight. So I'm sure most of you have already heard a fight or flight response, but this is basically a surge of hormones, namely adrenaline and cortisol, but potentially some others, that kind of activate your system, getting you ready to either defend yourself from the threat or escape the threat itself. So stress, again, just like worry, is this very natural, very necessary part of our lives, right? Our bodies are programmed to have this. There's a reason we have all these stress hormones, right? But sometimes our stress gets a little carried away, or sometimes the threat lingers long enough that it can have this really long effect. So the deer out in nature who hears a stick break immediately turns to see if there's actually a threat there or not, right? And if the threat is there, then they choose probably to flee, because fighting is not usually available to deer with predators, right? So they take all of that adrenaline, all of that cortisol, and they run as fast as they can, right? And you've probably seen this, whether with a cat or a mouse or a squirrel in the road, they sometimes freeze, or a deer, right? But they run really fast and really hard. And they're doing two things when they do that. They are escaping the threat, so they're effectively reducing the threat, right? But they are simultaneously burning off all of that stress response in their body. So by the time they stop running, they're usually pretty exhausted and the felt sense of stress has dissipated, right? So if anybody's ever been like in an almost car accident, you've probably had this experience where suddenly your body is like, right? And then somehow you kind of like let it go. And that might take a minute, a few seconds, it could take hours, right? So here's the problem right now. We're exposed to this threat that is sort of ubiquitous, vague, hard to pin down, and extremely protracted, right? So personally, I do not yet believe myself to have COVID-19, right? But the threat has been out there for weeks now, actually months. So I was in Japan when coronavirus really broke out in China. And so since early January, I have felt the threat of coronavirus very poignantly, right? You know, I'm flying through international airports, etc. I do not think I was patient zero, for the record, in America. So I have this stress and my body does its thing. The only thing it knows how to do when there's a threat, it fills me with cortisol, it fills me with adrenaline, it gets me ready to fight. So for many of us, in like the first week or so of the coronavirus in your community, so I think we have folks from all over the country, so I don't want to sort of say, but you know, in Montana, I feel like that was around Friday the 13th. And then things quickly escalated. And by the following Friday, we were really in a place of, you know, really being threatened by this thing. That whole week and kind of the following week, I felt a lot of activation. You can holler in the chat if you want to chime in on this, but I felt kind of ready for anything. I was waking up at 4 or 5 every morning, kind of like ready to fight the fight. I was doing all sorts of things to protect my business, to protect my employees, to make sure that our family was going to be safe. Like everybody else, I tried to buy toilet paper. I never found any at the store. I still haven't found any at the store. But I was filled with adrenaline in the spirit of preparing me to respond to this threat. Yeah. And then the threat never really came, right? And many of us did this interesting thing where we were looking at newspaper articles and watching the news and listening to the radio and reading as much as we possibly could. And what I think was happening for many of us during that time was our stress response was saying, you got to pay attention to this. There's a threat out there. So we were like the deer in the woods looking everywhere because we heard the stick break. And so we were really heightened. You can hear it in my voice as I talk. You could probably feel it in your own body. And for a week or two, many of us stayed at that activation level. And then in the last week, at least for me, just on the timeline that we're at in Northwest Montana, we had a different experience. The threat never really materialized yet. And, we had a few cases, but it wasn't quite as intense as it felt like it should have been given the response I was having. So I actually experienced a lot of fatigue that followed. I felt as if I were in this place of being really kind of exhausted. And, I think it's important for us to remember that that feeling of being, totally exhausted, that is your stress response, right? That is the feeling of being in this position where you are, I'm going to end the videos, don't worry guys, where you are in this position where you've been waiting and waiting and waiting for all the activation. You're ready, you're here, you're gonna respond to the threat doesn't come, and now you're exhausted. So just in the chat, you're welcome to share if this kind of resonates with you, if you sort of felt this really intense activation and then this kind of letdown. Anybody feel that? If you guys were all in the room with me, I'd be like, raise your hands, but it's really hard to do here. Yeah. Okay, and some of you still feel activated, totally. So who feels totally exhausted? Because all of these stress hormones are really debilitating, right? And so we're going to talk about how to cope with the stress hormones, but I think it's really important to just know, this is what's been going on. This is your body thinking it's helping you. And, you can say to your body ooh, you're actually not really helping me right now. This is not super helpful. So whether you're still in the activation, so your body is still I know there's a threat out there, I'm ready to fight, or if you're in the exhaustion phase, whatever it is, it's totally okay. That's your body, right? Oh, and Sarah, that's a great comment, right? So and then homeschool started. So for folks in Northwest Montana, it started this last Monday after spring break, right? Which was such a delightful spring break. And now you have to be a teacher. And so now the threat is back, right? What if I'm not a good enough teacher? What if I can't get my kids to participate? What if, right? What if this affects all these other things? The stress returns. So it's important for everyone to just kind of have some sense of how does stress affect me? So personally, stress affects me at 5 a.m., 4:30 to 5 a.m. Stress is hey, Sarah, there's some things you could be doing, right? And as the day wears on, the stress kind of dissipates some because I'm being productive. Maybe I'm getting stuff done. Maybe I've had a glass of wine, whatever it is, the stress reduces, right? But it's right back there waiting for me the next morning. So knowing how that is for you and what your personal response is going to be essential, right? Yeah, and Mary, that is a really great comment. So, it's there's this rumination that's happening, right? We're spending all our time and resources on it. And then there are all these feelings of wait, so we all got all excited for nothing? What's going on, right? And so all these feelings, stress can create any number of feelings, and they're all perfectly acceptable. You all are exactly where you should be. It's not where we wish we were, but it's exactly where you should be. All right. All right, so now I'm going to talk about anxiety. So anxiety is the buzzword of this paradigm these days. So anxiety kind of combines the physical element of stress and the cognitive element of worry into this like frantic sort of physiological mental panic that is really hard to get a hold of. The thing about anxiety is that it's usually triggered by either a false alarm or something beyond our control. So when we're stuck in that rotary, right, and we add the physiological stress response to a threat, so we're stuck in the rotary and a car almost attacks us, right, that can feel or can trigger kind of this anxiety response, right? So we're in the rotary, we can't get out of the rotary because there's nothing we can do, and now something came to attack us. Now I'm filled with anxiety. So anybody feeling this lately? No, me neither. Yeah, I haven't had any anxiety. And it's interesting in my clientele, what I've noticed is that those of us, those folks who have a lot of anxiety kind of normally, naturally, they're more anxious people, they've struggled with anxiety throughout their life, they're actually having an easier time with this than those of us who haven't really had a lot of anxiety in our lives. Because the folks who have had a lot of anxiety are like, oh, I know what to do when I'm stuck in that rotary and somebody comes to attack me. I have all these coping skills that I've had to develop, right? But those of us who have like, I have never been on this rotary before, I have no idea what to do, anxiety can feel really overwhelming. Okay, so we're going to shift gears away from stress, worry, and anxiety. So I'm going to welcome any questions related to this or any kind of lingering comments. I'll just give you just a moment to put that in there. Or maybe I've just explained it all, or maybe you're all like so panicked right now that you're all off to buy toilet paper because that's all you can think to do when we talk about this. Okay. Oh, actually, there's one more slide on stress, so you guys have a little bit of time to share your thoughts. So stress happens in the body, like I've said, right? I love this cartoon because I feel like it summarizes it perfectly. So our brain is spending all this time trying to solve the problem, right? And it's just like over and over and over. What if I do this? What if I do this? Our hearts beat faster. We might feel sweaty palms. We might even have palpitations. Our tongues tell us to comfort ourselves with food. And then we do that, and then our digestive system is like, just kidding, I'm gonna make you feel really sick now, right? The real downside about prolonged stress, prolonged exposure to stress, is that it really messes with us. And one of the worst ways that it messes with us, and this is kind of key right now in particular, is that it weakens our immune response. So our body is filled with these stress response hormones, and it's busy kind of ruminating and beating faster, and all of those things actually reduce our ability to fight infection. So in case you didn't believe me or know it for yourself so far, it's really important for us to figure out ways to reduce our stress now. Great. All right, and here's kind of just one more summary of all the ways that stress affects you. For me, and it's funny, I didn't even write it on here, but it shows up in sleep and maybe reduced concentration, right? So I'm kind of like all over the place. That's why I had to make notes for myself for today's talk so that I wouldn't lose track of things. Okay. All right, so now we're going to shift gears to talk about the window of tolerance. I know some of you have already heard me talk about this, but I'm going to give you kind of a brief rundown of this really essential psychological concept and how it applies to us right now. So we have our window of tolerance, and in that window, right, if you picture that kind of between these two lines, we can sort of function. We can have highs and we can have lows, but that we're staying in this optimal zone where we can remain mentally engaged, we can feel well, we can access our wise mind, and we can think through problems, but we can also feel our feelings and feel okay about our feelings. This is our optimal state. Everybody has a different size window of tolerance depending on kind of a number of factors largely related to your history and kind of like what you've learned throughout your life. So if your window of tolerance is sort of this big, right, you can manage to have emotions and feelings like within that realm. If you have a huge window of tolerance, right, you can have a bigger sort of scope of emotional experience. And if your window of tolerance is really, really small, you're really limited in what you can tolerate and what you can feel. Okay. So our goal is kind of twofold. Our goal is to make sure that we can be in a position where we have a big enough window of tolerance so that we can cope with everything that comes our way. And then also we want to try to manage what's coming our way so that we can stay in our window of tolerance, right? So I want my window to be as big as possible, but I also don't want to expose myself to stuff that launches me out of my window of tolerance completely. Questions or anything on that? Okay. So, and you're welcome to kind of type in questions as we go, because this is like kind of a heady topic, but I think it's important for us to understand. So when we get kicked out of our window of tolerance by becoming too aroused, so this is like when we can't think clearly, we're emotionally distressed, we feel kind of like totally overwhelmed by all of the input, we are really reactive. So this is like when your spouse or your child walks in the door and you're like, why did you say that? And they're like, I didn't even say anything, right? I've never done that, but I'm just saying hypothetically speaking. So this is hyperarousal. And we can't calm ourselves down. So we can't pull ourselves back into our window of tolerance. Alternatively, I feel like somebody has themselves unmuted. So let's make sure everybody is muted. I'm going to mute you all. And I'm going to not allow you to unmute yourself. Okay. So if we go into hypoarousal, this is when we're shut down. So this is depression, lethargy, right? For many of us who experience that kind of uptick in stress and then this mass plummet, I was just talking to a friend about it the other day. She's like, I don't know what happened today. She's like, yesterday I was like fired up. I was going to change my website. I was going to do all this stuff. And today I just feel down, right? So our stress hormones can kick us into a hypoarousal, or we might just kind of be a person who, when we get overwhelmed, we sort of go into that shutdown. So just like our window of tolerance is a very specific personal thing, whether we get hyper or hypo-aroused is also a pretty personal thing. So I tend to think of people as generally either like more on the anxious side or more on the depressive side. So you're either like more an Eeyore, right? Or you're more a Tigger. It's a Winnie the Pooh reference in case anybody doesn't know. And so if you're more of a Tigger, you tend to be a little over aroused and you're doing a lot and you're figuring everything out until you're not, and then you're kind of in a panic. And if you're more of an Eeyore, you tend to be doing okay, plugging along until suddenly you get kind of kicked out of your window of tolerance and you're just sort of like muted and numb, right? And so, oh, and great point, Anna. So you can go between both. So there are definitely people who kind of like swing. And I'm not saying you're like bipolar, right? But you can be a sort of person where like sometimes you get overwhelmed and it like kind of like freaks you out. And sometimes you get overwhelmed and you're just totally muted and numb. So there are two ways that we can really cope with this, right? We can grow our window or we can reduce our exposure, right? And we're going to talk about a number of ways in order to grow our window, right? Because that's ideal, because then we can just have a wider emotional experience available to us. But we can also, as this little diagram sort of shows, there are things we can do when we're in the hyper or hypoarousal that pull us back into that window of tolerance. Okay. So questions or thoughts about window of tolerance, because it is kind of like a tricky little concept, but one that I really find useful because I think it's helpful if we can say to ourselves like, I am out of my window right now, right? And we don't want to be out of the window, especially right now. We're supposed to be staying at home. Yeah. Great. Yeah. So zones of regulation. Yeah, perfect. And we're going to talk a little bit more about regulation in a second. Awesome. Okay. So now we are going to talk about what we do. So you might be feeling kind of hopeless or despondent at this point, or in a panic because you're like, yes, I have all of these problems. What do I do? We're going to talk about that right now. All right. So first and foremost, we are going to talk about the basics of kind of like what we do when things are not great. So raise your hand if you've been feeling like what you wouldn't give to be able to push the normal button right now. So Jenny, my friend who I think is on here, she sent this great little video where it was her pushing the normal cycle on the dishwasher. And she was like, oh, wouldn't this be just so great? And I lost it. I was like, I would love to be able to just go back to normal right now. And so one of the things we can do right now is trying to create normal as much as possible. So during the regular world of work week in the winter, I skin up Big Mountain 2 or 3 times before work in the morning. So yesterday I was like, even though I'm not actually going to work, I'm going to wake up at 5:30, I'm going to skin the mountain, and then I'm going to go to work. And I even showered and put on work clothes, right? So how many of us have been hanging out a lot in our daytime pajamas, which I'm really into? Sweatpants have been my new best friend, right? But it feels really abnormal. So I'm at least changing out of my night pajamas into my day pajamas. So how do we create normal during these times, or some close approximation of normal? We're also going to talk today about soothing. So when things feel really hard, what do we do to make ourselves feel soothed, right? And how do we ground ourselves, and what's enjoyable? So I've been finding myself really craving like something just delightful. Like I'm like, can we go out to dinner? No, we can't. Okay, so what are enjoyable things other than Tiger King, which is super enjoyable? um, how do we maintain our attachments? How do we keep our sense of purpose and meaning? So I'm going to talk about both of these. So right now, because we're in such an abnormal state, we are feeling like we're missing a lot of our attachments. So a lot of the people and places and things that we feel really connected to just aren't available to us as much anymore. So your friend that you usually have happy hour with, or your friend, like I go to the gym every morning with my friend Katie at 7 a.m. How are we maintaining those attachments? Are we doing a Zoom happy hour? Are we doing a Zoom workout together? Are we going for a 6-foot walk together instead? So really working on maintaining those attachments. So interesting side note, our attachment system, which is a kind of brain system that lives in our prefrontal cortex for the most part, is really closely linked with our self-regulation and executive functioning system. So your attachment system is closely linked to the same part of your brain that functions to keep you kind of on track, doing well, and also regulating your difficult feelings. So if some of you have been craving attachment a lot lately, it might be kind of neurological. Your brain is sort of saying, hey, this part of my brain is not feeling so good right now. I don't know why, but I need it to feel good so I can do the really important things right now, like plan meals for my family that aren't just quesadillas, although quesadillas are totally fine right now. And, the part of me that needs to get work done, even though I have lots of distractions around my house, right? So when we increase our attachment and our attachment kind of soothing and connection, we actually increase our ability to emotionally regulate and to get stuff done. So don't lose your attachments right now. Okay. And now for purpose and meaning. So yesterday I said to a client, your purpose right now is to sit at home. That is what you're doing for your country. Eat pizza on the couch. That is what you're doing for your country right now. All the research shows that staying at home slows the spread, right? My aunt helps run the risk department in a major hospital in New York City. They are begging us to slow the spread, right? And for good reason. When I hear her stories, it gives me a sense of purpose and meaning, even though objectively speaking, what I'm doing doesn't really look like I have much purpose in the world. So sitting on the couch in sweatpants for 2 weeks straight, well done, Zach, watching Tiger King might not feel like you're contributing to the greater good, and yet you are. So when we have trauma survivors or folks who have experienced grief, one of the things that we work towards is helping them make meaning out of their suffering. We know that making meaning out of suffering helps us actually feel better. And so the more you can do to read stories or to inform yourself about how staying at home and eating pizza on the couch serves your country, the more you're going to feel purposeful and the less despondent you will feel, like on an existential level. Okay, the other thing, find things you can control. So I like this, that right now a lot of us feel incredibly out of control. And I had a friend who was, she's redecorating her kitchen, and she said, is it weird that right now I'm like obsessing over cabinet pulls? And I was like, no, that's awesome. You should by all means be putting your energies on controlling the things that you actually can control, right? So for some of us, that looks like organizing our bookshelves or being really meticulous about our food preparation. But what it shouldn't look like is trying to control our spouse or our children, right? So we need that sense of control, but we just have to be careful where we find it. So pick little things that you are positive you can actually control, and then do those things. For me, I feel a lot of control and power when I bake, because I can follow a recipe and then I can produce a desired outcome, and I feel magical and like a mini kitchen god, right? So finding something, however insignificant, and control it. The nice thing about baking is that you can find soothing if you bake something delightful, enjoyment if you enjoy baking and eating as much as I do, and you can even have attachment because maybe you bake something and you leave it for your neighbor. Okay. Being part of something bigger, so that's what you all are doing today, but it is important for us to not feel as if we were isolated. It is really essential that we remember our connection. For some people, feeling that connection might come from like a loving kindness meditation practice. For other people, it might look like what I've been doing, which is writing note cards and sending them to people. It might look like baking for somebody. It might look like making masks for your hospital that's running low on PPE. Or it might look like engaging in your essential job that serves your community in some way. And then finally, gentleness. So this is like my favorite word, but we need to be gentle with ourselves right now. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately, so one of my meditation teachers loves to say, does it pass the may you live a life with ease test? So we want everybody to live a life of ease. We don't want everybody to feel like their life is really hard. So yesterday when I woke up trying for my normalcy and I skinned up the mountain, there were some pretty strong headwinds. And at some point I was passing this guy and he was like, hey, how's it going? And I was like, this is awful. And I said it out loud and I was like, this is awful. Why am I doing this? So I kind of hit the next tree where I could take shelter. I switched out my gear. I skied down. I came home, took a hot shower, and made myself a cup of tea. We don't need to be rugged and harsh with ourselves right now. This is hard enough, so be gentle. Okay, so those are the basics. That's kind of like the foundation upon which we're going to build everything else. So when it comes to mental wellness, we first want to take prevention or precautionary measures. For many of us, it's a little late for that. We're already here. But we're going to go through them anyway, because in a little bit, you're going to have a quiz and you're going to have to answer the questions. So pay attention now. So we have some strategies for maintaining mental wellness. and I assume you can all read them, but just in case you're on a tiny phone, I'll kind of run through them. So we work on maintaining a balance so that we have different things in our lives. That's really important. Like as a runner who has an injury right now, I can't run. If running was the only thing that I had to keep me well, I would be in trouble, right? So we want to make sure we have diversity there. We love relaxation, so we want to maybe integrate some meditation or guided imagery. Connecting with nature. I have felt really sad for many of the folks in cities right now who can't really leave their apartments, let alone walk in nature. So as long as that remains available to us, that's pretty cool. Creative expression. So what are some things that give you fulfillment in a generative way? I love the concept of owning your won't. So learning and practicing saying no and setting limits when it's necessary. Growing and developing our communication skills. Having the ability to kind of evaluate our experiences and apply problem solving techniques. So kind of thinking through, like, we went to a party, we said a stupid thing. Was that thing really as important as we thought it was? Was this really as intense as we imagined it was? So kind of checking ourselves. And then time management, so routine and structure. I've been trying to get out of my night pajamas every day by 9 a.m. at the latest, for example. Our structure doesn't have to be super rigid. It doesn't have to be super crazy, right? We just want to have some of it. Okay, and then just a quick note, because I think for many of us, a lot of the things that we use to stay mentally well are social. And I've been really trying to get people to use the phrase physical distancing instead of social distancing. It hasn't really caught on yet. I don't really expect it to. But we have to be 6 feet away, but that doesn't mean we can't connect. So can we use technology? Can we write letters? Can we engage in group experiences that still sort of fill those cups? Can you go outside for a walk with somebody and stay 6 feet away? I've heard stories of like grandparents like who live in the same town coming to the window of their loved ones and being on the phone with their grandkids, but just watching them play through the window. And again, it all feels super abnormal and super unusual, but we're doing our best to kind of approximate normalcy. Okay. So, and sometimes even if you're doing all the right things, anxiety still comes along and just knocks you down, right? I just love the awkward Yeti. If you don't already know about the awkward Yeti, it's a good time to learn. Okay, so now is interactive time. So go ahead and grab a piece of paper or your phone, somewhere where you can write something down, and we're gonna write on one side of the piece of paper. I don't have a dry erase board because it's in my office and I didn't want to go to my office. So just write 5 things. So write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and write prevention. And then on this side of the paper or on the back of the paper, go ahead and write crisis and write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And we are going to now write 5 things that you can do preventatively, prophylactically to maintain your mental wellness, and 5 things you can do in a freak out. You do not have to have this done until the end of our presentation because I'm going to give you lots of ideas between now and then. But I want everybody to be working on getting to the point where they have 10 things that they can do to cope. So I will say that the other day, I learned that someone really close to me had a coronavirus exposure, like a direct exposure. And it was really hard to take that information in. I really worry and love this person and really want them to be okay. And I found myself in a panic, right? So I was like on the rotary with the stress response. My palms were sweaty, my heart was racing. I was driving my car, which is not a great thing to be doing when you're in a panic, right? But what I did was I just looked around and I named every color that I could see. I literally was just like tan, brown, beige, because right now that's kind of the landscape in Northwest Montana. And I did that until I felt more grounded. So we're going to run through a bunch of activities like that, but the second half, so that second column is for crises like that. So there are times when we kind of get knocked clear out of our window of tolerance, and we need strategies to pull ourselves back in. So if you are a nurse in the ER, for example, and somebody comes in and you're prepping yourself, getting yourself ready, right? Can you take a moment to do one or all of these 5 things? Okay. And then on the bottom or the back or whatever, I want you to write 1, 2, 3, and at the top write people. So I want to make sure that you have 3 people who you can talk to kind of about any feeling or any experience that you're having. And if you don't have 3 people, we can work on that too. Okay. So, and then these are some other ideas that we are going to run through. So mindfulness, which we're going to do a little practice together, because why not, right? We're going to come back to that. Mindlessness. So one of the things that I love most about running or skinning when I'm skiing is that I'm doing a thing that doesn't really take up a whole lot of brain power. And so my mind can just wander. And it's important in these moments when we feel so controlled, right? We have like the government saying whether or not we can leave our house, whether or not we can go to work, our boss is saying when we have to work, etc. Sometimes it's important to let your mind just be free. Of course, we don't really want to do that if all our mind does is wander to bad places. But it's important that we give ourselves those breaks. And then some other things with that. So bilateral stimulation. So EMDR is a type of therapy that was developed to help people with trauma work through difficult times. And the essential understanding of it is neural pathways kind of between both sides of our brain, between both hemispheres. And we can simulate some of that at home on our own. Cross-country skiing and skinning, for example, where you're sort of like doing a thing that involves back and forth movement between the right and left side, is bilateral stimulation. Tapping opposite sides of the body, opposite sides of the chest, or even your legs can be bilateral stimulation. And you can make this a game like with your partner, you know, you can like touch each other's shoulders and then your knees, right? But when we're doing that, we're actually engaging our brain in a way that kind of short circuits it and gets it kind of back on track. It's kind of like jump starting your brain. Soothing things, we've already talked about a little, but I want to put it in my presentation on every single page because it's so important right now. Bubble baths, fresh loaves of bread, chocolate chip cookies. Like, holler if you have made more than a dozen chocolate chip cookies in the last week, right? Even just resting. So every morning I've been waking up, making myself a cup of decaf, sitting by my wood stove and just watching the fire for 10 minutes. And then I do my meditation. I find the fire really, really soothing. Music is another one. So making sure you incorporate kind of delightful stimulation through your ears. Music can be, how do you say this? Like, music can take the background noise that your brain is doing with worry, and it can replace it with beautiful sound. So if you're cooking dinner and you find yourself just kind of ruminating about something, turn on a song that you really love, that you even maybe love to sing along with. The other thing with music, which I've been encouraging, is called drive-by dance parties. So if you have a friend who's having a hard day, get in your car, cue up your favorite Lizzo song or other wonderful tune, and pull up in front of their house, send them a text that says, please come to your window or come to your porch, and then have a little dance party for them. Get back in your car and drive away. Drive-by dance parties. And then finally, when and how to get professional help. So it's totally normal right now to be suffering more than usual. And I think whereas therapy is often seen as this thing as like, oh, it's only for people who are really, really disturbed, or it's only people who want to really improve their life. Like, I'm just trying to like stay okay right now. Therapy is for you. So we have, you know, at Sweetgrass and all throughout the Flathead Valley and wherever you live, there are, you know, skilled clinicians who know these things, who can teach you these things, who can practice these things with you, to help you build your window of tolerance and also help you get back in it when you've exited. There's no shame in wanting a therapist. And even if you go to a therapist for one appointment, you get kind of all the skills you need and then you bail, that's totally fine too. It's not something you have to do forever. Okay, so now we're going to do a little meditation together. So go ahead and make yourself as comfortable as you like. If you want to lay down, you totally can, or if you want to just sit in your chair. And we are going to do a practice called RAIN together that is designed to sort of help us cultivate the ability to notice what's going on in our experience without either getting carried away by it or judging it harshly and beating ourselves up for having. Excuse me. So we're going to take a few rounds of inhale and exhale, and whenever you're ready, you can close your eyes. So if that comes on the third inhale or the fifth inhale or exhale, that's fine. So inhaling deeply through your nose, and since you're all on mute, feel free to let your exhale be as audible as you need it to be. So if you want to let a sigh out, sometimes that can feel really nice. And it can also signal to your body that now is a time that is safe to relax. Inhaling through the nose and exhale through the mouth as loudly as you want. And we're going to do that a few more times. And if your eyes aren't already closed, go ahead and close them. Excellent. And let your breath kind of go back to its normal rhythm. And you can use just your nose, or if you like exhaling through your mouth, you can stick with that. And take a moment to kind of just investigate, like, where do you feel your breath most in your body? So for many folks, it's kind of in their chest or their belly, in the back of their throat, or their nose. Just kind of take a moment and find it. And then see if you can't hold your attention there. And if it helps to sort of name what's happening by saying inhaling, exhaling, that's beautiful. Or if it helps to count your breath, you can certainly do that too. And your mind is going to wander, because that's what minds do. And whenever that happens, just kind of gently invite your mind back to your breath, to the space where you feel it most. And we're going to walk through just kind of doing a mood scan right now. And we're going to take these steps. So just kind of noticing, checking in with yourself, like, what kind of mood? What's my vibe right now? What am I experiencing? And as soon as you notice a particular feeling, if it's worry or sadness, despondency, whatever it is, then just acknowledge it by naming it. And if you don't quite know what it is, that's okay. Give it a color or make up a name. Oh, there's Eeyore. Or oh, there's pink. And with your next few inhales and exhales, just investigate it. Be curious. Where did it come from? How long has it been there? What happens when I send it some breath? What happens when I focus on it? And if your mind has some judgment about it, or there's some commentary about how you shouldn't feel this way, or it's silly that you feel this way, or you wish you didn't feel this way, see if you can just put that commentary aside and just come back with this curious stance of, huh, I see what's going on there. I notice it. And if you're like me and you have lots of different feelings happening, kind of do this for each one. Recognize it, acknowledge it, be curious with it, and just name it without judgment. And if you get lost in thought and you're well down the road, that's okay. Just invite yourself back to the breath and start again. Inhaling, exhaling, and then scanning. And slowly bring your attention back to your breath. Really kind of focusing now on wherever you feel it in your body. You don't have to change your breath. You don't have to move your breath. Just let it be wherever it is. Inhaling, and exhaling. And with your next inhale, allow your head to just kind of lean over to the right, your right ear kind of coming closer to your right shoulder. And take a few rounds of inhale and exhale there. Noticing what it feels like to be kind of way over here. And again, not with judgment or commentary, just noticing, naming. And with your next exhale, go ahead and allow your head to swing down so your chin comes towards your chest. Inhaling and exhaling. Noticing what it feels like to be here, looking inward. How does it feel to have your throat a little closed up? And with your next inhale, letting your head move to the left with your left ear coming close to your left shoulder. Not raising your shoulder to meet it, just allowing it to kind of be where it sits. What does your breath do when you're here? And now finally, with your next inhale, letting your head come back to neutral. And taking a few deep breaths, allowing yourself to notice what it feels like to be in this neutral space. Centered. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes, bringing whatever calm or awareness you want with you back into the room. So if you have never meditated before, you can no longer say that. You just did. And the meditation that we did was called Rain. You can do this in meditation. You can also just kind of do it in life. So really often our experience kind of gets sort of wrapped up in commentary and judgment and story. So I have a feeling of sadness or anger. And then I write a story about what that means about me, what it means about the world. And if we can instead just recognize, acknowledge, be curious, and name it without judgment, we're actually more free, right? We're not so limited by our stories. And so right now in particular, there's a lot of stories running through our mind, right? I should be this, I should be doing that. But what does it feel like if we just give ourselves some space where our only job is to breathe? Okay. So we're just adding to your toolkit. Now we're going to do some grounding. So grounding, kind of similar to meditation or mindfulness, these are techniques designed to bring you back into the present moment, especially when you're like stuck on that rotary, like I was the other day when I learned about my friend. So I've already mentioned the first one. So this is color naming. So we're all going to do it together, and I can't hear you, so you don't have to be shy. So simply name every color that you see in your environment currently out loud, as many as you can, as fast as you can. Brown, teal, aquamarine, pink, red, blue, off-white, light blue, gray, black, silver, orange, black, green. Perfect. So what you probably noticed is while you were doing that, all you were thinking about were the colors. So when our brains are stuck, right, they're kind of like hijacked by this worry or this dread or this anxiety. We need to get our thinking brain kind of back online. So by rooting ourselves in our surroundings and our words that aren't focused on COVID-19 or our job or our kids or our spouse who's driving us crazy, whatever it is, we're just focused on colors, we get our brain kind of back online. Another way to do that is triangle breathing or square breathing. So triangle breathing, we're going to imagine a triangle. We're going to inhale, we're going to pause, and then we're going to exhale. Inhale, pause, exhale. We're going to try that just a few times so everybody kind of visualize a triangle. Inhale, pause, exhale. Inhale, pause, exhale. You can also do that with your hands. So you can inhale, pause, exhale. Inhale, pause, exhale. Inhale, right? And you get all the way to your pinky and probably you're going to feel a little more quiet. We can also count to 27. So a lot of people count to 10. 27 is my lucky number. I won $500 once in Las Vegas, the only time I've ever gambled on lucky number 27. So we just count to 27. I feel like 10, it's not quite long enough. Like if I'm really irate about something, I'm like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And I get to 10 and I'm still really irate. But 27 gives us a little bit longer. If that's too simple and your brain needs a little bit more of a challenge, you can count backwards from hundreds by 7. Really tricky, but for the mathies in you, this is a great one because it requires all your concentration. So if you're ruminating on something and you can't seem to stop, 100, 93, right? I can't go any further than that, but if you can, it's a great strategy to use. Okay, finally, you can do 5 things that you can see. So naming them out loud: curtain, tree, bush, ground, bed. 4 things that you can hear: chainsaw, car, Sarah's voice, right? 3 things that you can feel. So I feel my feet on the ground. I feel my sweater on my body. I feel my earrings moving back and forth. 2 things that you can smell, right? Unless you have COVID and you can't smell anything. And then 1 thing that you can taste: toothpaste, right? And once you've run through all of those, there's a good chance that you're going to feel kind of grounded. The next one I love is squeezing your toes. So clenching your toes into a fist. It kind of pulls all of your attention and concentration. Try it with me right now. It's a very uncomfortable feeling. And then relaxing them and doing that 3, 4 times. And then finally tapping, like we talked about. So that bilateral stimulation, right? And you can be a goof about it. It doesn't matter, but you're doing it. Okay, questions about grounding, the rain exercise, or anything that I've said so far? How long should you tap? Great question. I feel like in the 10 to 20-second range is good for me. Because if I do it too much longer, it becomes kind of like I stop thinking about it and I stop feeling it. And now I'm back to thinking, right? So I'm just like, and you might add like some counting with it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, right? And then you move on. Great question. All right. So remember earlier we talked about the deer in the woods. So when the deer feels, when the deer hears that stick break and their body fills with cortisol, you can literally see this. You can actually watch videos of this on YouTube. I think it's fascinating. They literally like shake their muscles to release the feeling if they realize it's not a threat. So if they turn around and they see a predator, they're going to run and that burns off all the hormones. But if they turn around and they don't see anything of threat, but they still have all those hormones coursing through them, they literally will shake it off. So you can do that like with your kids or with your spouse or by yourself with a really good song, and you can literally just shake it off. But you can also use like various forms of kind of hard exercise if you're feeling that way. So let's say you just read a piece of news or you got an email or a text from a friend that brought some scary, thoughts into your head and it kind of activated that stress response. Do 20 jumping jacks, do 10 push-ups, turn on some beats and do a hard dance for a minute. Frantic cleaning can also kind of release this feeling, right? So we want to let ourselves be in a position where we can burn through those chemicals that are in our body because they're toxic for us. Okay. One of the last things I want to share with you, there are some great articles out there right now about how you can use this time to learn a new language, you can plan some vacations, you can learn how to bake sourdough bread even though you've never baked anything in your life. And there's a lot of productivity pressure, especially on the internet right now, but also maybe among your friend groups, right? So friends who are saying like, I did 10 push-ups, now you have to do 10 push-ups. The reality is that getting out of bed, brushing your teeth, feeding yourself some food, that might be all you do in a day. And giving yourself that grace, right? So grief and stress and worry, those all take up a lot of emotional energy. And to then put more pressure on yourself currently, it really isn't fair, right? And so even though it would be wonderful if I emerge from this learning how to speak Japanese, it's probably not going to happen. So setting those goals isn't really fair to myself. So, thinking about what are the basics that I have to get done. I need to change out of my nighttime pajamas into my daytime pajamas, at least by 9 a.m. I need to brush my teeth. I need to eat 2 meals a day. Maybe 5, right? I need to feed my children. Do I need to feed my children chicken a la king? Can I feed them quesadilla? Yes, right? Can popcorn be considered one of my meals? Yes, right? I need to respond to emails. Do I need to clean out my inbox? No, right? So being gentle with ourselves and remembering that we do not have to do this all. And we are coming towards the end, so if you have held a question, now would be a great time to type it into the box. So here are some resources for you. So I am leading a 2-week-long meditation course starting on Monday. You can sign up the same place you signed up for this webinar on our website, sweetgrasspsychological.com. You'll receive an email every day with a link to some writings and thoughts by me, as well as my voice recorded, leading you through a 8 to 10 minute meditation. They're all pretty short, just to keep it easy. There's also a lot of options out there for online counseling right now. So if you are feeling particularly stressed and like you're not coping and you didn't get what you needed today, there's things like Talkspace and BetterHelp. And there's also all of your local therapists are all doing telehealth right now. Every one of us has moved over. Some of us are still doing in-person visits, but not a lot of us. So if you need therapy, now's a great time to sign up. And again, there's no commitments. There's also some great meditation apps out there. So Headspace is the one that I use sometimes. There's another one, Calm, I think. And there's some really great apps out there, or a podcast, sorry. There's a podcast called Nothing Much Happens, which is like bedtime stories for adults. And it's basically stories where nothing much happens, but it sort of relaxes you. I really like those. Sharon Salzberg on her website, she's one of my favorite teachers. She put together like a kind of crisis survival package for everybody. There's a website called 10% Happier, based on the book 10% Happier. They're doing meditations, I believe, every day, available to the public. And then there's also app tracking, you know, so you can make your phone tell you when to stop taking in the news and when to turn things off. And, you know, I think it's okay to use your phones more right now. If you have kids and you usually limit their screen time, it's totally reasonable right now that you're like, just watch whatever you need to. Like, I got a shower for the first time in 3 weeks. Like, it's fine. So being gentle with yourself, but if you need to limit yourself, limiting yourself as well. All right, so any questions or comments from anybody here? I want to thank you all for joining today. So I am not seeing anybody having any comments or questions. Maybe that's because you guys all know everything you need to know. You all are so welcome. I'm really grateful that you all showed up for yourselves today. And if you're interested in learning more or engaging in dialogue with me, you can email me through my website, sweetgrasspsychological.com. But I hope you all have a good enough day and you experience some sense of normalcy. Oh, and somebody asked, will this be available? My goal, I recorded it, and my goal is to have it available on our website. I will keep you posted. So I'm so glad you all joined, and thank you so much. And if you have lingering questions, you can always message me privately and ask me questions. I'll stay on for just a minute or two. So thanks so much, everybody.